evening or afternoon or whenever you're listening. We're going to talk today about absolute value inequalities. We did equations way back towards the beginning of the year. Now we're going to exchange it for inequality. So today you're going to learn how to graph and solve absolute value inequalities. So just go ahead and do this review questions, review of absolute value equations. Pause the video. When you are finished, check your answers. All right, so how do you solve absolute value inequalities? You've got to get the absolute value expression all by itself, set up your two inequalities, flip the order symbol on the negative solution, and then solve both inequalities. If it is a less than or equal to, it's going to be an and. If it is a greater than or equal to, it is going to be an or. So let's go ahead and solve and graph this first inequality. I have my absolute value symbols all by itself, so I can just write my two inequalities. N minus 8 is less than 2, and N minus 8, and I got to flip, is greater than negative 2. So just like equations, we set up those two inequalities. I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So I get N is greater than 10, or less than 10. I add 8 to both sides here, and I got N is greater than 6. So I've got the inequality that says N is greater than 6. So that means that I'm going to have an arrow going this way. Less than 10, I'm going to have the arrow going this way. And it's going to be our solution where these two overlap. So they overlap right in here. So our solution is going to be between 6 and 10, and not including that. If we were to write that as a compound inequality, it would be 6 is less than n, which is less than 10. So there's your graph where they overlap. Okay, let's look at the next example. Again, my absolute value is all by itself, so I can write my two equations or inequalities. 5c plus 3 is greater than 9, and 5c plus 3, flipping the order symbol, is less than negative 9. So in the first equation, if I subtract 3, I'm going to get 5c is greater than 6. If I divide by 5, c is greater than 6/5. Here, if I subtract 3, I'm going to get 5c is less than negative 12, and I divide by 5, c is less than negative 12/5. Okay, so now this time it's greater than, so it means that our points are going to be greater than the distance between them is going to be 9. So when I go to graph, I've got 0, 2, negative 2. Okay, so my solution of 6.5 is a little bit more than 1. You don't have to be exact, just show me it's a little bit more than 1, and it's underlined on your notes. You can barely see it here. So it's going to be a closed circle with my arrows going out, and less than or equal to negative 12/5 is going to be a little bit less than negative 2. So closed and going out. So this is an or. So C is going to be greater than or equal to 6/5, or C is going to be less than or equal to negative 12/5. Next example. I don't have the absolute value symbols alone, so I've got to subtract 10 from both sides. And I'm going to get the absolute value of 2x plus 5 is greater than negative 22. Okay. When we were solving inequalities or equations, we knew that when there was a negative answer there or on the right side, that it would never be true because absolute value is always positive. However, with this, it's still always positive. So whatever I get in that absolute value is positive, and we're asking if it's going to be greater than -2. Well, it is. No matter what values I get for x, it's going to be greater than -2. So this is actually all real numbers. Okay? And the graph of that would just be the number line. So it would be the number line with arrows going in both directions. All right, last example. We've got the absolute values all by itself, so we're going to set up our two inequalities. 2p minus 8 divided by 4 is greater than 9, and 2p minus 8 divided by 4 is less than -9. So to solve, I multiply by 4, and I get 2p minus 8 is greater than 36. If I add 8, I'm going to get 2p is greater than 44. Okay. Divide by 2, p is greater than 22. Okay. Now if I multiply by 4, I'm going to get 2p minus 8 is less than -36. If I add 8, I'm going to get 2p is less than -28. If I divide by 2, I'm going to get p is less than -24. So here it's greater than, so it's going to set up an OR situation. So if I have 0, I'm going to have, we'll say 22 here, -24 here. Okay, so I'm going to have an open circle. Did it again. Going to have an open circle on 22, and it's greater than 22, so my arrow is going to go to the right. It's less than -24, so my arrow is going to go to the left. So basically, we took our compound inequalities that we learned before, and we have switched them to absolute value, which is just another form of a compound inequality, and we've solved. Okay, so hopefully today you learned how to graph and solve absolute value inequalities. Have a great evening.